The media fixates on kinetic displays. They point to the Hwasong 17, citing documents titled Missile Threat as the definitive risk. This is a strategic deception, calibrated for a public conditioned to view power through the lens of explosions. The mathematical certainty is this: a state facing a Pokrovsk front collapse and 15-1 losses cannot afford a symmetric war. The kinetic cost is prohibitive. Their leverage is not in their arsenal's strength, but in their opponent's systemic fragility. The primary vector is not launch on warning, it is silence. CSIS and RUSI analysis confirms the deployment of assets designed for one purpose: to sever the digital nervous system of the global economy. Subsea data cables, low-orbit satellite constellations. The objective is to create a blind Leviathan, a global financial system, deaf and dumb, for 48 critical hours. The markets bracing for a Fed crisis cannot model this. Every AI-powered defense, from war-tested combat systems to high-frequency trading algorithms, becomes a dormant liability. This is an attack on solvency, not sovereignty. A blueprint to detonate trillions in financial liabilities before a single kinetic asset is deployed. They don't need to win a war. They just need to unplug the machine that tells you who's winning. The fundamental driver is not ideology. It is a solvency crisis. A state cannot sustain a high-intensity kinetic conflict while experiencing attrition rates reported by sources like the Kiev Post to be as high as 15-1. This is not warfare. It is asset liquidation on a national scale. The mathematical certainty of conventional defeat forces a strategic pivot. Forbes analysis, corroborated by RUSI reports, has consistently framed the conflict as a domestic liability for Moscow. An unpopular war, funded by a degrading economic base, creates an existential threat internally. When the cost of kinetic engagement exceeds the state's ability to finance it, the leadership is cornered. Their conventional options are depleted. This weakness necessitates a pivot to asymmetry. Facing adversaries deploying war-tested combat AI, Russia cannot compete symmetrically. The objective shifts from winning on the ground to threatening the systemic architecture of its opponents. The primary vulnerability of the West is not its military, but its hyper-leveraged financial system, already stressed by entities like the Fed as financial markets brace for crisis. Therefore, the threat of escalation, using strategic assets like the Hwasong 17 as leverage, is not a military strategy. It is a financial one. The goal is to force global markets to price in the risk of systemic collapse, triggering a liquidity crisis in Western banking sectors. The threat is designed to detonate the financial liabilities of their opponents. This is the last remaining vector of leverage for a conventionally degraded power. The kinetic cost equation has been inverted. According to analysts at the Royal United Services Institute, RUSI, a modern main battle tank is a $5 million liability on the battlefield. The asset now liquidating it is a $500 first-person view drone. This represents a 10,000-to-1 cost disparity. It is not a tactical anomaly. It is a permanent, systemic feature of the new battle space. This vector is what high-level intelligence refers to as the democratization of violence. The term signifies that the monopoly on industrial-scale lethality, once held exclusively by nation-states through massive capital expenditure, has been shattered. The barrier to entry for inflicting systemic economic damage on a superior military has effectively dropped to zero. A conventionally degraded state no longer needs a peer-level force to impose unacceptable costs. It simply leverages this mathematical certainty, forcing its opponent into a solvency crisis by defending multi-million-dollar assets against a near-infinite supply of disposable threats. The primary battlefield is not a trench, it is a balance sheet. While legacy media focuses on kinetic attrition rates, citing Russia's 15-1 losses on the Pokrovsk front, they miss the strategic pivot. This conventional degradation is not a sign of imminent collapse. It is a planned transition. It forces a nuclear-armed actor into a corner where their only remaining vector of influence is asymmetric. The deployment of this asymmetric protocol is not occurring on the front lines. According to RUSI analyses, the staging grounds are gray zone conflicts and designated proxy laboratories. Seemingly isolated events, like warnings of systemic instability in nations from South Africa to Canada, are not causes. They are symptoms. They function as live-fire exercises to test the financial and social solvency of Western systems. The objective of these probes is to perfect the blueprint for a systemic solvency crisis. The threat is not the kinetic impact of a Hwasong-17 missile. It is the mathematical certainty of its effect on markets already bracing for a Fed crisis and crippling rate caps. These regional laboratories are used to calibrate the precise level of political and economic shock needed to detonate the financial liabilities of an opponent before a launch sequence is ever initiated. While war-tested combat AI accelerates the kinetic cost for conventional forces, it simultaneously accelerates the adversary's pivot to the financial weapon. The gray zone is where this weapon is aimed and calibrated. It is the invisible theater where the solvency of the West will be decided, not by battalions, but by bank runs triggered by calculated asymmetric threats. The final command protocol is not initiated by an incoming missile. It is initiated by total information denial. This is the launch-on-warning doctrine, the foundational logic of nuclear deterrence. The protocol states, if early warning systems detect an enemy launch, you must fire before your own assets are liquidated. The system is predicated on perfect, instantaneous data. Now, introduce a variable. Systemic conventional failure. When a nuclear-armed state suffers extreme kinetic costs, such as the documented 15.1 losses on the Pokrovsk front, their calculus shifts. Conventional warfare becomes a vector for bankruptcy, not victory. Their only remaining leverage becomes asymmetric. This is not a theory. It is a mathematical function of asset depletion. The launch-on-warning protocol, as detailed in CSIS assessments, is a brittle, automated tripwire. The trap is not to destroy the missile, like a Hwasong-17 in its silo. The trap is to blind the sensors that watch the silo. With the proliferation of war-tested combat AI, the digital domain is now the primary vector of attack. This is the fog of digital war. A targeted cyber attack blinds the radar and satellite network. The commander in the bunker now has a binary choice based on zero data. Is the signal loss a system error, or is it the precursor to a decapitation strike? The doctrine, the protocol he is sworn to uphold, forces his hand. He must assume the worst. He launches out of fear, triggered not by an enemy missile, but by the absence of information. The financial liability is detonated before the kinetic event ever occurs. The next phase is not kinetic. The adversary's calculus has shifted. As reports from authorities like CSCs confirm events like the Pokrovsk front collapse and staggering 15.1 losses, conventional warfare becomes a liability. The pivot is to asymmetric leverage. The target vector is not a military installation. It is the systemic fragility of Western finance. The system is already primed. Markets are bracing for a Fed crisis and rate caps, creating a pre-existing condition of high stress and low liquidity. This is the exposed liability. Therefore, the calibration shot will occur within 12 months. Expect a targeted, non-kinetic, and attribution-impossible event, a cascading 72-hour blackout of a critical data center corridor, specifically one responsible for clearing U.S. equities or derivatives. The event will be officially logged as catastrophic infrastructure failure. No state actor will claim it. The objective is not destruction. It is to introduce extreme counterparty risk into a system already questioning its own solvency. It is a mathematical demonstration that the next escalation will not be on the battlefield, but on the balance sheet,